From the Oklahoman newsroom, this is an OSU update. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio. The Cowboys had an off week before playing on Saturday, a home game against K-State, and it did not go well for the Cowboys. Nathan Ruiz joins us on the phone. And Nathan, you were there. The score ended up looking somewhat normal, but this was anything but a normal game for the Cowboys. They were flirting with a historic loss at one point in the second half, right?
Yeah, absolutely. OSU ends up losing 75-57, so an 18-point loss, still less than ideal. But with about 6 minutes left, OSU was down by 34, would have set a record for the largest home loss by the Cowboys in Gallagher-Iba Arena. So they were in a position for some pretty poor history, a pretty infamous loss. But instead, they end up getting a bit of a rally there at the end. But still, they're, as Mike Boynton put it, they were getting embarrassed on their home court before that little run at the end. And so, obviously, Kansas State's a good team. They're atop the Big 12 right now, so you can't really blame the Cowboys for losing to the Wildcats, especially when you look at OSU's roster situation. But obviously, a disappointing day at the office when you're down by 34 at any point.
Yeah, and, you know, I mentioned they were off all last week, which when you're as thin as the Cowboys are, the thought was, well, maybe they get a little rest, maybe they recover a little bit, come out with some energy. And we'd seen them with good energy, Nathan, in those games prior to, but it just seemed like nothing was really working well. What surprised you, or what stood out to you about sort of the fact that the Cowboys found themselves in that 30-plus point hole?
Yeah, you know, I think the biggest surprise was maybe how well K-State shot. You know, they aren't a great three-point shooting team. They end up making 16 three-pointers, which was a program record for a conference game for the Wildcats. And then you add in, OSU's been trying to do some different things defensively. This ties into that three-point shooting. OSU's been going to zone a lot, doing some 1-3-1, some 2-3, while still mixing in some man, and an effort both to avoid foul trouble and just really to try to do anything it can to kind of mix up opposing offenses. And it seemed that the Wildcats were always prepared for whatever look they saw. Barry Brown, one of the Kansas State stars, he mentioned after the game that while watching film on the Cowboys, they had seen them switch defenses 15 times in one half. So they were completely prepared for whatever defense the Cowboys were going to throw at them, and it showed on Saturday.
Well, what about these upcoming games, Nathan? Because now the off week I mentioned last week, or the several days that they had between games, that disappears. They're back at it on Wednesday and then on Saturday, and it sounds like they may be a little bit more shorthanded. What's the latest with that?
Yeah, you know, they're going to enter maybe one of their toughest weeks of the season, going to TCU and then to Kansas. Obviously, Kansas not as formidable as it has been in the past, but that's always going to be a tough place to play. And OSU might be attacking this week with only 6 scholarship players available. Duncan DeMuth dealing with an injury that kind of kept him out of practice this week, only played 46 seconds on Saturday and didn't look great. You know, as Mike Boynton put it, he's not well. It's a situation they're evaluating, but now OSU has their 5 starters, and then Curtis Jones off the bench, and then everyone else available to Mike Boynton would be a walk-on if Duncan DeMuth isn't able to go. So obviously this roster just keeps getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's going to be tough to manage the rest of the year. I wouldn't be surprised to see Luke Major kind of get more minutes. He hit a three-pointer late in that game, and during that late run the Cowboys had. He's a guy who you'd expect to step up. It'll be fascinating to see if OSU's hand gets forced and Boynton has to call upon Tanner Taylor, who was a student manager that was put on the roster, or even Gabe Simpson, who was added to the roster for Saturday's game, who's a football walk-on who's from Jay. So it's a strange situation. You would never think that Mike Boynton would be dealing with a roster that has 6 scholarship players, a walk-on who was homeschooled, played for the OKC Storm, and Luke Major, a guy who was a student manager when the season started, and a guy who was a football player when the season started. So it's certainly not easy for the Cowboys, and it's not going to get any easier.
Well, and those games coming up, Wednesday at TCU, a road game, and then Saturday at Kansas against a team that will be playing their in-state rival Kansas State earlier in the week, probably a Big 12 title on the line in that game. Then Texas Tech, another team at the top of the league, comes to Gallagher-Iba. If you look ahead to next week, maybe that TCU game, Nathan, gives the Cowboys a bit of a reprieve, but like you mentioned, when you also see Texas later on next week, then TCU at Gallagher-Iba, K-State at K-State. I mean, the schedule is just not looking kind to the Cowboys right now.
Yeah, absolutely not. And what's funny about it is you maybe look ahead to the last game of the regular season when they host West Virginia. That might be their biggest game of the season in terms of it might decide who finishes 9th and who finishes 10th in the Big 12. Obviously, that's not going to do anything to the in-state tournament. It might just decide whether OSU is playing OU in Kansas City during the Big 12 tournament. So I think, obviously the Cowboys want to win as many games as they can the rest of the way. It's going to be tough. They're right now in the middle of a 4-game conference losing streak. They were able to beat South Carolina in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, but this team has had a lot of different challenges thrown at it. Looking back to the start of the year, a couple guys dealing with injuries, and then you get the suspensions, guys leaving the team, now injuries playing a role. And there's a lot of basketball left to be played, so who knows how much more they're going to have to endure the rest of the way.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a league, obviously, with 8 teams at least being talked about as big as NCAA tournament teams right now. So when you look at the schedule, it looks tough regardless. Everybody out there practically is a tough team to play against. Cowboys back at it on Wednesday at TCU. That game starts at 8 on ESPNU. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.